In this video, I'll share with you how you can 10x your rental income without having to manage these classic Airbnb vacation rentals that have this constant turnover every couple of days. I'll share with you how I took several of my existing rentals and turned them into corporate housing for traveling professionals that stay at least 30 days. I'll show you how these midterm rentals can increase your cash flow by $500 to $1,000 per rental unit, what it takes to manage these properties, and I'll cover the pros and cons of this strategy to see if it's a good fit for you. If you're new here, my name is Paul David Thompson, and in 2015, I used real estate to escape my corporate job, and now I'm a full-time investor who has complete control over my time, and now I help real estate investors just like you scale their businesses and lead life by design. I've been involved in real estate for 7 years now, and I've done something like 500 transactions, and I have a portfolio of about 40 rentals in Little Rock, Arkansas. And a couple of years ago, my wife and I decided to give this Airbnb thing a try, but with a little bit of a twist. I didn't think I was up for managing the constant turnover of Airbnbs, and I was concerned that vacation rentals might be getting a little saturated. So I went with this corporate housing strategy on 3 of my units. And I call this strategy midterm rentals, and I'll explain why here in a second. So in this video, I'm going to share 6 steps to setting up these properties, and stay to the end and I'll share our biggest lesson we've learned so far. So now as we're getting into this, let's define exactly what we're doing when we say midterm rentals. So long-term rentals are the typical rentals that you think of. They're not furnished, the tenants pay the utilities, and it's common for the lease to be 12 months or longer. And on the other extreme, a short-term rental or vacation rentals, commonly called Airbnbs. And of course, these are naturally fully furnished by the owner, and all the utilities are paid for by the owner. And the length of stay is typically 7 days or less, sometimes as few as 1 to 3 days. Now, the distinction with midterm rentals is the stay is a minimum of 30 days and is typically less than a year. But the important distinction here is 30 days or more. So step 1 is, who is the customer and why does this work? There's concern right now that vacation rentals might be in jeopardy, and there's a lot of Airbnb operators out there that have very expensive properties that may see a lot of vacancies because of a pending recession. And that's a very real scenario that I think could happen right now with the looming recession. And there's also a staffing shortage in just about every field all across the country. This is especially true in the medical field. And at a hospital, they have to at least have some skeleton staff to take care of patients. And oftentimes, staffing agencies and hospitals are paying traveling nurses 3 to 5 times the normal going rate. So there's a huge opportunity for these professionals who are willing to travel and get paid a lot more money. And of course, when they do that, they need a place to stay. And most of the tenants that we've had have been traveling nurses. We've had a few people who were in town for, say, like a military situation, or there's some sort of long-term training for some sort of corporate. But the medical field is driving most all of the demand. And the typical accommodation for traveling professionals are these, really crummy extended stay hotels. And if you haven't been to one of those before, they can be, pretty sketchy. And even if they're not sketchy and they're just okay, who really wants to stay in a hotel room for 3 months or more? That'd be kind of depressing. And it's so much nicer to be able to stay in a real house that has a full kitchen, that's your own space. Step number 2, what type of property? So here's an interesting detail that isn't at first obvious when you start thinking about this. The type of property that you'd run a midterm rental through is often quite a bit different than a short-term or vacation rental. The use case is far more utilitarian and functional as a midterm rental as compared to a vacation rental that tends to be much higher end. So you don't actually need a super fancy property. In fact, what you really want is a simple property that's centrally located near places of employment, but that is safe and preferably is quiet, because a lot of these traveling nurses are working the night shift. And what we're talking about here is Class B properties with 2 or more bedrooms, and 1 or 2 bathrooms is perfect. And these aren't these big mansions that you might have for some sort of vacation rental. These are something like 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet, 1,600 square feet. That's all you really need. And I think these properties also need to be within a reasonable driving distance to to employment like military bases or hospitals. So I would not consider properties that are really far remote or out in the country as being a good choice, whereas sometimes with a vacation rental, that is exactly what you're after. So here's the amazing thing. If you're already a landlord, you may already have property that would make a perfect midterm rental in your existing portfolio. I've actually turned 2 of my properties, so 3 units overall, into midterm rentals. I'd had these properties for a few years already, and I'd had them leased to typical long-term tenants. And when the single family went vacant, I knew it needed rehab. It was just due for a typical facelift. So I rehabbed this property with this use case in mind of doing midterm rentals. So I made it bright. I put in luxury vinyl tiles. I upgraded the bathrooms and put construction grade granite into the kitchen, which I may not have done that if it had been a long-term rental. I would have kept the butcher block Formica type countertop in place. Step 3, rehab and furnish. So just like any short-term rental, you're going to need to fix this place up quite nice. You may need to do slightly higher finish than what you would for a traditional tenant, and you'll need to pay attention to a lot more of the functional details like color matching and checking the drawer pulls to make sure that they're nice and smooth. Whereas with a long-term property, you may not check that kind of details. And you also want to have newer appliances. A lot of times, with my long-term tenants, the appliances, the tenant actually brings them. And if at all possible, you'll want to include a washer and dryer in every unit. Because when you're traveling, who wants to go to a laundromat? We actually put stackable washer and dryers. We had to kind of squeeze them in there. There wasn't really any kind of natural space for them, but we just made it work because we knew it was important for this type of unit. Now, for furnishing a midterm rental, you absolutely need to furnish the property all the way down to the towels and forks, obviously. Residents who are staying in a place for 2, 3, 4, 5 months, which is probably the most common, a 3-month stay, are most likely going to be cooking in that house. Whereas with short-term rentals, it's not that uncommon for the tenants to only use the coffee bar. So the kitchen will absolutely get used, and it needs to have all these little extra functional items like rice cookers and Instapots. Rice cookers come up all the time in the Reddit boards. This is just, these traveling nurses want a rice cooker. And the fancy coffee bar that we're all associate with vacation rentals is just not much of a draw. That's not why people are there, is to have fancy coffee. In fact, we even find that a lot of the traveling nurses bring their own coffee with them. It definitely needs to be clean, bright, and nice and appealing, but you don't need all these extra cool features like a 7-head shower spa-like treatment. You don't need this like creative stoplight feature or a pool table or a ping pong table. That just isn't the kind of vibe this resident is after. What they're looking for is clean, functional, and safe. These are the 3 biggest concerns for this type of resident. And I'm actually doing a separate video diving into the details of furnishing midterm rentals, so I'll make sure and link it in the description below. Step number 4, how to find these traveling professionals in the first place. So there's a variety of options to choose from when offering up your rental property for a midterm stay. One is a website called furnishedfinder.com. You can contact the local staffing agencies as well in your area, but the option that we chose was actually Airbnb, and that's probably why you're on this video, because they have so much traffic. They just drive so much activity. We simply list the property with a minimum stay of 30 days. And then our listing clearly states perfect for traveling nurses or perfect for traveling professionals. We've had one nurse who found us outside of Airbnb and she just pays us directly, but everybody else has gone straight through Airbnb. Step 5, bringing in the money. So now let's discuss what you really want to know, and that's how much money can you make doing this. In our experience, we've been able to make something like 1.5 to 3 times more than the going rate for a long-term rental. So for easy math, if a property normally rents for, say, $1,000 a month, then we've seen that you can get somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 per month for the same unit. Whereas if you were to rent a similar property as a true short-term vacation style rental, you would make somewhere between 2 and 5 times the income. So there's definitely more income with short-term rentals, but the trade-off is dealing with much more turnover, having to manage a turnover every 2-3 times a week sometimes. Whereas with midterm rentals, you're doing that 2-3 times a year. And here's actually a really huge bonus tip. If you're renting for more than 30 days, you fall outside of most jurisdictions' rules for short-term rentals. A lot of jurisdictions are getting really strict about where they allow short-term rentals or to buy some sort of license. I've found in everywhere I've looked that you're treated as a long-term rental so long as the property is being rented for at least 30 days. And depending on where you live, that could be a game changer and make Airbnb a viable option in your market where you thought before it may not be. So in our case, we had one single family rental and one duplex that had a 2-1 on each side. And that makes up a total of 3 units, and we're making somewhere between 2 and 2.5 times as much as if we were to rent that out as a long-term rental. Step 6, cleaning. Now, you'll have to think about turnovers. There are not as many turnovers as short-term rentals, but you still have to manage turnovers. And it's not going to be this 4-hour turnaround where somebody checks out at 11 a.m. and somebody then checks in at 3 p.m. That is just not likely to be the case with mid-term rentals because someone, after all, has been living there for months in many cases. You'll need to clean everything, restock some items, and you'll even need to check for repairs because when a property is being lived in for 3, 6, 9 months, there's going to be some wear and tear that you need to fix. So you need to check to make sure everything is working properly, and this will be a deep cleaning. I cannot emphasize this enough. This has taken us as much as 2 to 3 days to get a property completely clean to the standards that we would need for the next tenant to move into it. And so what we've done is we've hired a cleaner that is familiar with Airbnbs, and she has this checklist. And we often take several trips to look at the property. Even after she's finished cleaning, we'll go and check it and figure out it needs a little bit more. And we've tried to hire a cleaner who is used to cleaning people's houses every few weeks, like a Molly Maid type service. And that just doesn't cut it. That they don't have their heads around what all you need. Even if they could clean it well enough, they don't have the checklist mindset to check on repairs for you. So this is going to be what I would consider a custom cleaning job. We normally pay the cleaner a few $100s each time. And one time we had a major cleaning and that cost us as much as $500 to get the house in the kind of shape it needed to be in. Now remember that bonus tip that I talked about? Now that you know about midterm rentals, I promised I'd share with you our biggest lesson, and that's about pets. It is very common for traveling professionals to want to bring their fur babies. And we read that half of all traveling nurses want to bring their pets along. And I'll save the details of all the horror stories for another video, but just suffice to say that we decided that having pets is not worth it. The additional potential income that you get from having tenants typically does not make up for the additional cleaning cost and hassle that you have to deal with when the tenant moves out. So our policy now is no pets. And then if they ask, which they will, we can decide on a per case basis. And so far our policy has just been no pets, and we're just not going to deal with the hassle. We just have found that there's too much demand for us to make exceptions for that. Furthermore, our best tenants so far have had no pets. So hopefully this is helpful, and maybe now you're considering converting one of your rentals into a midterm rental so you can get this additional income. Or you could now buy a property knowing that it's a good candidate for generating a lot more income with a property that really you wouldn't have thought of would have been that desirable. Stay tuned for more content, and I've left another video for you right here.